Well, the European space industry has been buzzing lately, and for good reason. We had a pretty significant event just the other day. Isar Aerospace, a German startup, well, they attempted to launch their very first Spectrum rocket. Big stuff. It happened on March 30th, early morning, 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And get this, they launched it from the Andøya Spaceport, that's way up north in Norway. And, this is a big deal because it was the first time a private company in mainland Europe, outside of Russia, obviously, tried to launch something into orbit. They were originally supposed to launch over a week ago, but the weather, how it is up there, it just wouldn't cooperate. So, okay, the rocket, they'd actually lifted off perfectly, no problems there. But then about 25 seconds in, things start to get interesting. Right after they announced they were going to do this maneuver called a pitchover, which is basically where the rocket starts to tilt towards its planned paths, it seems like they lost control of the rocket, attitude control as they call it. It happened fast. Like within 5 seconds, the whole rocket had completely flipped over and was heading back down to Earth. They cut the live video feed, and about 10 seconds later, boom, they heard this massive explosion. And later on, footage came out showing the rocket slamming right into the ground near the launch pad and exploding on impact. It was, dramatic, to say the least. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets a little, unexpected. Isar Aerospace, they're saying the whole thing was a success. Now, I know what you're thinking. The rocket blew up. How can that be a success? Well, according to the company executives, they activated the flight termination system, which is basically a safety mechanism to stop the rocket if something goes wrong 30 seconds after liftoff. And that shut down the engines. So after the engines cut out, the rocket fell in what they're calling a controlled aerodynamic descent into a designated zone in the water near the launch pad. And here's the kicker. The launch pad itself seems like it's totally fine, no damage. Isar Aerospace, they're calling the whole test, which they named going full spectrum, a success. Why? Because their main goal wasn't actually to reach orbit this time. Their primary objective, and they've been very clear about this, was to gather a ton of data about the flight, how everything performs in real-world conditions. And they seem to have gotten that data. The Vice President of Mission and Launch Operations, Alexander Delano, you might know him, he's worked on Ariane, Soyuz, and Vega launches. Well, he said the mission was a success, specifically because of all the valuable data they collected. They're already working on their second Spectrum rocket, and apparently it's pretty far along in production. But they're not rushing anything. They've said it's way too early to give a timeline for the second launch, since right now they're totally focused on analyzing all the data they got from this first one. Makes sense, right? So while this first launch didn't quite go as planned, it's clear that Isar Aerospace sees it as a valuable learning experience. They gathered a huge amount of data that they can use to improve their rocket and their launch procedures, and that's really what these early test flights are all about. It's about pushing the boundaries, learning from mistakes, and constantly iterating. And hey, even though they didn't reach orbit, they still made history. This was the first orbital launch attempt from mainland Europe, funded almost entirely by private investment. That's a big step forward for the European space industry. Now let's talk a bit more about the Spectrum rocket itself. It's a two-stage rocket, meaning it has two separate sections, but each contain their own engines. It's designed to carry up to 1,000 kilograms of payload, satellites and stuff, into low Earth orbit, which is basically an orbit relatively close to Earth. And for sun-synchronous orbit, which is a special kind of orbit that allows satellites to pass over the same spot on Earth at the same local time each day, it can carry up to 700 kilograms. The first stage uses 9 of these Arizona Killa engines, and the second stage uses a single vacuum-optimized the Killa engine. Both stages are fueled by liquid oxygen and liquid propane. An interesting choice, right? This particular flight, though, it didn't have any actual payload on board. It was purely a test flight, designed to make sure all the rocket systems work together as they should. Speaking of Isar Aerospace, they're a relatively new company, founded in 2018, based in Munich, Germany. And here's the impressive part. They've developed this entire rocket pretty much in-house. That's not easy to do. So far, they've raised over 400 million euros, which is about $430 million, to fund their work. And they're not alone. There are actually quite a few startups popping up across Europe that are developing these smaller launch vehicles. The thing is, none of them have actually made it to orbit yet. It's a tough business launching stuff into space. And it's not just Isar that's facing challenges. There's another German company, Rocket Factory Augsburg. They go by RFA, and they had a bit of a setback last year. Their RFA-1 rocket, the first stage of it, was destroyed during a static fire test back in August of 2024. So yeah, space is hard. But despite the challenges, there's a real sense of momentum building in a European space industry right now. And a lot of that has to do with the European Space Agency, or ESA. Just a few days before the Spectrum launch, ESA kicked off this competition called the European Launcher Challenge. It's basically a call for proposals from European companies that are developing new launch services or ways to upgrade existing rockets. ESA is planning to pick a group of companies this summer, and then they'll try to get funding from their member states in November to support these projects. Now, the head of ESA, Josef Aschbacher, he's been very vocal in support of of Isar Aerospace. He knows how hard rocket launches are, and he said it's crucial to learn from these attempts, whether they're successful or not. He even said before the launch that regardless of the outcome, the Spectrum launch was going to be historic because it was the first commercial orbital launch attempt from mainland Europe. And he's right. It was a significant event. Ashbacher has also been a big advocate for ESA co-funding projects like Isar Aerospace and other launch providers. He sees it as a way to increase Europe's independence in space, which is becoming increasingly important. Europe's really been pushing to secure its own access to space, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine last year. Before the war, Europe relied heavily on Russia for launches, but that's obviously not an option anymore. Meanwhile, the commercial space launch industry is booming, especially in the US and China. Companies like SpaceX, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing in the US, and a number of Chinese companies are really leading the way. Europe's space industry, well, it's faced some setbacks in recent years. The development of their new Ariane 6 rocket has been delayed, and their Vega C satellite launcher had to be grounded after an accident. But, they're not giving up. They're looking at different locations across Europe for new spaceports, and they're continuing to invest in new technologies. It's not just about keeping up with the rest of the world. Independent access to space is increasingly seen as crucial for Europe's security and geopolitical standing. Remember Virgin Orbit? They tried to do a launch from the UK back in 2023, but it failed, and the company ended up going bankrupt. So yeah, it's a risky business, but the potential rewards are huge. Speaking of potential rewards, Isar Aerospace already has a contract with the Norwegian Space Agency. They're going to launch 2 maritime surveillance satellites into orbit for Norway by 2028. And their Spectrum rocket, it's specifically designed for launching those smaller to medium-sized satellites, weighing up to 1 metric ton. So they're definitely carving out a niche for themselves in this growing market. And there's a lot of support for what they're doing. Mario Draghi, former Italian prime minister and all-around influential figure, well, he wrote a report that highlighted the potential for space to boost Europe's economic growth. And he's not alone in that thinking. More and more people are recognizing that space is not just about exploration and scientific discovery. It's also a key driver of innovation and economic development. So yeah, this launch, even though it didn't go exactly as planned, it's a really important moment for Isar Aerospace and for the European space industry as a whole. It's a sign that Europe is serious about establishing itself as a major player in the commercial space race. And I, for one, am excited to see what they do next. Now, what about you? Are you as intrigued by the evolving European space industry as I am? If you enjoyed this detailed look at Isar Aerospace's launch attempt and want to delve deeper into the world of space exploration, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We've got plenty more exciting content coming your way, so stay tuned, and thanks for listening.